right. Good morning, Kap. Good morning once again. Good morning, dear our Vice President of Chiang Mai Universities, Dean of Faculty of Economics, honorable speakers, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Faculty of Economics, Chiang Mai University is very pleased and honored to welcome you all to Chiang Mai and to the 13th International Conference of Thailand Econometrics Society 2020 or TES2020.
Right. First of all, please let us allow us to introduce ourselves. My name is Pacha Chaikit Mongkon.
My name is Pitun Thanabadikit, or you can call me Pete.
Right. So we are lecturers at Chiang Mai University, Faculty of Economics.
And this year, TES conference is co-hosted by the first one, Power of Innovation Foundations, Bank of Thailand, Faculty of Economics, Prince of Songkhla Universities, Faculty of Economics, Khon Kaen University, Department of Applied Statistics, Faculty of Applied Science, King Mongkut University of Technology, North Bangkok, and last but not least, Mahasarakham Business School, Mahasarakham Universities.
Right. So please give a round of applause for people who make this conference possible.
So, Min, what is about the theme?
So, Pete, the theme of this year is behavioral predictive modeling in econometrics. So very interesting.
Yep.
So on the behalf of the faculty, we are delighted to host this special event of constructive and robust discussions focused on advanced quantitative methods and econometrics innovations.
Ladies and gentlemen, before we begin, let us be entertained by two classical Thai dances performed by our undergraduate student from Thai Dance Club. So the first show is called Grong Sabat Chai. So, Min, what is Grong?
So Glong is drum in Thailand.
Yes. So what about this show? Why do we have this show? What is this show all about?
So Glong Sabat Chai is a traditional performance usually done before the time of war and the traditional time.
So to raise up spirit of the soldier.
Right, to make them, excited, ready for war, and then raise their power and spirit.
Okay, so are you guys ready to be excited?
Right, so please give a round of big applause for our performers who are undergrad students at Faculty of Economics. What a great performance!
Wow, I feel that my heart still beating fast. Anyone feel like me? Or anyone have any heart problem?
We are still young. What are you talking about?
Oh, I forgot about that.
Right.
So this is honestly, this is my first time as well to see this kind of show. It's very great performance. So I just moved into Chiang Mai, so I haven't had a chance to see this kind of performance yet. This is our first time.
Oh, now you'll be even more excited about the second one.
Yes, really? What is the second one also about then?
So for the next performance, it will be, to lower our heart rate a little bit, we were gonna have a more mellow performance of Phon Jong.
Phon Jong, wow. Is this northern dialect?
It's Phon Jong, what does it mean?
Yes, what does it mean? Basically, Phon, I guess Phon is a dance, right?
Dance, yes.
But what
so
is about
Phon means
Jong?
dance.
What is Jong?
So Jong means parasol.
Parasol.
Or umbrella.
So can you guess what is our performance going to be? Dance and?
Are we gonna make rain coming down?
I'm not quite sure. But
Probably not, right? So very interestingly, in Asia, people don't only use umbrella for when it rains. People also use it when, they just walk out in the sun to protect ourselves from the skin.
Yep.
So today, hopefully it will remain sunny and nice throughout the weekends.
So far, it's very nice for the past, whole weeks. I like it though.
Right. So we are ready for our next performance. So please give a warm welcome for our students in Phon Jong. Thank you so much for our lovely students for our great performances.
So my heartbeat just went from all the way to 140 for the first, performance. And now it's raised to about 70. It's so chill.
Right, so we did cardio exercise already today,
Yep,
right?
that's right.
That's done for workout today. So we are ready for some econometrics.
Yep.
Right.
So once again, thank you so much for our performers. So at this moment, I would like to give the stage to Assistant Professor Phairat Kachanakarun, the Dean of Faculty of Economics, Chiang Mai University, who will briefly report the details of the conference to the Vice President of Chiang Mai University. Please welcome.
Associate Professor Lom Kilanukom, Vice President of Chiang Mai University. On behalf of the Faculty of Economics, I'd like to express our sincere appreciation to Chiang Mai University for a kind support to organizing the International Conference of Thailand Econometric Society, or TES, since the beginnings until this year. The TES conference aims to provide opportunities for all participants to share their advanced research and knowledge in econometrics and quantitative methods. For more than a decade, TES has played a significant role to promote econometrics and quantitative methods of the Faculty of Economics, Chiang Mai University. And this is a 13th TES where the theme is Behavioral Predictive Modeling in Econometrics. This year, TES 2020 will host 40 oral presentations which selected by our International Academics Committee, and 29 papers shall be invited to submit it in the book series published by Springer. Moreover, we are honored to have a nice special session for our keynotes and invited speakers. In total, there will be 49 talks by delegates from 9 countries at TES 2020. In addition to building a committee for scholars to exchange their experience in econometrics, we also provide the opportunity for graduate students to present their research papers. TES 2020 also received a generous financial support from various organizations including Power of Innovation Foundation, Bank of Thailand, Faculty of Economics, Prince of Songkhla University, Faculty of Economics, Khon Kaen University, Department of Applied Statistics, Faculty of Applied Science, King Mongkut University of Technology, North Bangkok, Mahasarakham Business School, Mahasarakham University. Moreover, the conference has been supported a voluntary work of the International Scientific Committee from 8 countries, as well as academic support by the Center of Excellence in Econometrics and administrative support by Economic Service units of the Faculty of Economics. Finally, on behalf of the Faculty of Economics, I hope that TES 2020 can serve the mission of Faculty of Economics and Chiang Mai University in conducting research and innovation for excellence. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Dean Phairat, for a great speech. So we are now going to set this conference in motion with the welcome remarks by the Vice President of International Relations and Corporate Communication of Chiang Mai University, Associate Professor Rom Jiranugrom. Please give a warm welcome for the Vice President.
Professor Phairat Kachanakarun, Dean of School of Economics, Chiang Mai University, Dr. Pisit Liatham, former Dean of School of Economics here, and also keynote speaker, distinguished scholars, participants, ladies and gentlemen, it is indeed a great pleasure for me on behalf of Chiang Mai University to be here this morning on this very special occasion, the opening ceremony of the 13th Thailand Econometric Society 2020, co-organized by our School of Economics and various other supporting agencies, universities in Thailand, Bank of Thailand, several other organizations to help in contributing to this international conference. And I should like first of all to extend my sincere congratulations to our School of Economics in organizing this international conference, completing its first round of 12 years, commencing the first year of the second round. It is not easy to run an international conference to complete one cycle and sustainably continuing to another cycle, and I hope there will be many more years to come. The success of this conference is not only the success of the School of Economics here alone, but also various contributions from different factors, from different agencies. One key factor, of course, we have invited speakers from overseas. I had an opportunity to talk with the American scholar residing in Taipei. Briefly, we also have Professor Hung from the United States of America, who are now living here. And of course, Professor Songsak, we have started and established this conference many years ago as Dean of Economics here. So I've invited speakers, but more importantly, this international conference, looking at the participants, is a venue whereby young researchers, young students, young scholars can contribute their thoughts and ideas in related topics of the conference. And that is very important, to be able to groom these young researchers, to nurture them so that they will be in support of the direction they will become scholars in these areas, full scholar and recognized scholars sitting in the front row like the scholars that we have here. And I believe in the power, the dynamism of networking by having different organizations joining this conference, various universities coming here. I think it helps with the network in econometrics of our country, the region, and the globe at large. If you want to go alone, we can go far. But if you want to go fast, you go alone. But if you want to go far, we go together. So this is the power of networking that I think we are here. I can see it, I can feel it. So on this very special occasion, I should like, as it is the beginning of the new year, extend my best wishes for everyone here. Wish all of you happiness, success, prosperity, and also find some time to explore the beauty of Chiang Mai, which is full of attractions and rich in culture, as you can see the performance at the beginning. With this, may I now declare the International Conference of 13 Thailand Economic Society 2020 open. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Associate Professor Rome Juranukom. So next, we would like to invite the speakers as well as distinguished guests in front of the stage to take a group photo, please. So thank you very much, everyone.
So it's time for our first session. First, we would like to invite Professor Hung Nguyen from New Mexico State University, the co-chair of the Scientific Committee of the Thailand Econometric Society, to deliver a speech on behalf of the Scientific Committee. Professor Hung.
Please
All right.
It's my pleasure on behalf of the Scientific Committee of TES2020 to welcome you all and thanks for attending this conference. It has been 13 years since the start of this annual conference organized by the Faculty of Economics of Chiang Mai University with the full support of its dean, devoted to the promotion of awareness of advances in economic education and research. The main theme of this 13th conference is behavioral predictive modeling in econometric, reflecting two main aspects of modern economic analysis, namely behavioral economics and a prediction approach, especially in this area of the so-called big data or data science. We are lucky to have a set of excellent invited speakers at this conference. While I will not introduce them one by one, but you will appreciate their talk during the conference. The main theme of our next year conference will be decided at tomorrow's business meeting. In view of the global interest in quantum technology, at CMU in particular, at the previous effort to promote quantum computation for the TES 2021, the theme could be quantum computations for economics and related topics. In fact, current effort at our Center of Excellence in Econometric, we are going to establish connection with experienced quantum center in Asia, namely Taiwan National University in Taipei in March, and Quantum Center at National University of Singapore in April. Turning to the organization committee of TES 2020, I would like to thank all the committee members, especially Professor Songsak and Dr. Yamaka, for making everything possible, including on the social events, which for sure will make participants appreciate the wonderful things in this city of Chiang Mai. Lastly, I cannot resist to thank a very special person. Without him, I don't know how to manage the scientific committee, leading to what you are going to see during these 3 days of the conference. He has been doing this incredible work every year since 2007. May I ask Professor Vladik Krajinovic to rise to receive our applause of thanks. Thank you.
So may I invite Professor Vladik Krajinovic?
Okay. Thank you very much for Professor Hung Nguyen for the nice words, and it's always a pleasure to be here. So right now I will be chairing this session. It is my honor and privilege to invite the first speaker. That will be the keynote speaker. The talk will be given by Dean P.C. Liak Tam. Dean P.C. is a former Dean of the Faculty of Economics, Chiang Mai University. He got his PhD in economics at Netherlands School of Economics, and he has many prestigious positions. So Dr. Hung Nguyen advised me not to read the full text, but just to mention the four most important ones. So he's the chairman of the board of directors, he's a deputy minister of finance, he's a director of the office of the governor of Bank of Thailand, and he is executive vice president of Bangkok Bank. So let's all welcome Dean Pisit.
Thank you, Professor Radik, for your kind invitation. In fact, all the titles that you mentioned should use the past tense because I have already relinquished all the positions. Now I'm a full-time politician. I'm sitting in the parliament as an MP for the Democratic Party. In fact, the session is about to begin in Bangkok. So I have to apologize that once I finish my speech, I have to rush back to Bangkok to attend the debate in the parliament because in the next 2 days, we are going to approve the budget for this year. The country is waiting for us to approve the new budget for the government, and therefore I need to deliver my vote. Otherwise, the government will not be able to function because of the lack of the budget. Ladies and gentlemen, first of all, may I thank everybody here, particularly Professor Rome, the Vice President, Dean Phairat, former Dean Songsak, Chan Hung. You are very diligent, and I'm very proud of you to help organize this seminar. It is one of my biggest moments that I was proud of when I was dean here for 8 years. In fact, it was started when Ajahn Songsak was dean. And from then on, we carry on year by year to invite key speakers and scholars from around the world, including Nobel Prize laureates, to come and deliver a speech. Today, I'm very honored that you start to invite a Thai person to deliver a keynote. And I was wondering what should I talk about because I have been involved more and more with the public policies rather than on the academic or even the quantitative analysis. Then I come up with an idea that I will bring to you some of the issues that have bothered me a lot because my background is economics, and yet I have to be involved with policy-making process, and I saw lots of conflicts, lots of misconceptions. So I hope I can spend a few more minutes with you. So I hope to spend a few minutes with you to air my frustrations so that you could bring this message into your work to help us put up the right policies for the country. First of all, inflation. Inflation is something we are very familiar with in economics. Every central bankers are more or less concerned with inflation, starting from the biggest country like the US to many others, including Thailand. And of course, central bank has been set up so as to look after inflation as a main target. And yet, we are informed that nowadays inflation is not a problem. In fact, inflation has started to come down since the 80s after Paul Volcker raised interest rate to 20%. And thereafter, and nowadays, inflation is below the targets practically everywhere, apart from some of the emerging market economies. So the point that I wonder, if inflation is coming down, why do people still suffer, particularly suffer from the cost of living? I just saw a movie about the homeless in California, in the US. In fact, the Department of Housing in the US had just announced that homelessness has risen by over 15% last year. And in many other states also, there are a lot more Americans who cannot afford to buy or to rent a house. At least you must earn over $130,000 US per year so as to be able to rent a house or a place to live. And therefore, many people who are now not able to afford a place to live, they have to live in tents or in their own cars. They are not dirty. They are middle-class people who got salaries, and yet they cannot afford to pay for the rent. This is really haunting. If inflation has been low, why do people suffer? Why cost of living is rising? So I think there could be misconception here. There are both good and bad inflation. Bad inflation is, of course, CPI. It's a direct measurement of inflation that we are acquainted with. But there are many other good inflations, namely asset price, like the stocks, or housing, or land, and many other assets have been risen a lot in their prices, particularly after the financial crisis in the year 2008. And I think this is what financial economists have turned a blind eye on. Namely, they share the economy that is doing well because stock market prices are going up, and they inject a lot of liquidity by this QE, or quantitative easing policy, that help jack up the stock prices, the housing prices, because liquidity massively being injected 3 or 4 times over the past 10 years. Practically in every central banks in the Europe countries. And they're pursuing not just injecting liquidity, but also lowering the interest rate to a very low level, or even to a negative level. So my fear is that economists has been biased against the poor and promoting the rich to be richer, whereas the poor or the ones who do not own assets would feel themselves being exploited, being poorer. Statistics from US recently shown that workers have to work over 160 hours to buy a stock in the S&P 500. And the disparity is growing even further. So I would urge you to help us take a new look at inflation, whether it is correct for the central bank to announce that there is no inflation and keep on injecting liquidity and jack up the prices of assets, whereas the cost of living continue to rise. So that's my first concern. My second concern is the purpose of monetary policy. In the past, it was to fight inflation, but now central banks after central banks are pursuing policies. They shift away from inflation targeting into monetary aggregate. I wonder, with cashless society, with digital technology, with digital currencies, and so on and so on, I wonder whether monetary aggregate targeting makes sense, which is something that the central bank has been, in fact, very keen to look at. Right now, you see capital flows in and out from one to the other country and cause lots of volatility. What I can observe is that central banks are now trying to use monetary policies so as to help mitigate the impacts of capital flows, particularly on the exchange rate, rather than to mitigate the problem of inflation like in the past. We have been persuaded by economists that we should try to create capital markets to make it a place for investors to get funding and to make it a place for the people to invest their money instead of putting it in the banks. But as you can see, central bank has been injecting a lot of liquidity into the system and pushing the interest rate to a very low level. And if you continue like this for foreseeable future, it is penalizing the savers. We are getting less and less for our saving, and yet our cost of living is rising. Not only the savers, banks themselves are also penalized. You can see banks in Europe, such as Deutsche Bank and others, are now in trouble because the reserve asset that they used to earn some interest from the central bank is now penalized with negative interest rate policies. Particularly the insurance businesses are also suffering because what the technicians has put up formulas for the actuarials. The actuarials has calculated doesn't valid anymore because interest rate is a lot lower than what they have assumed in the past. What I can observe at the moment is that the situation is very conducive for the big borrowers to gain to mobilize funding at a very cheap rate. So there is an unfair competition between the big corporates and the smaller ones. If you look at the Thai bond market, only 4 or 5 conglomerates floated around 40% of the total outstanding debt in the fixed income market. So as economists, I wonder whether we have overlooked the impact on competition, the impact on distribution. Another issue that I also like to raise is exchange rate. Unlike in the West, where there have been familiar with floating exchange rates for the last 50 years, since the breakdown of the Bretton Woods system in the 70s. And yet in Asia, particularly in Thailand, exporters are still hoping that the central banks would be providing them with a safe environment of exchange rate, ignoring exchange risk, ignoring hedging, hoping that the dollar and the baht would be kept stable. Particularly, they wish to have a weak currency so that they can earn better income for their exports. I wonder if this is a correct idea and good for the country. I observe in Latin American economies that is trapped in the middle income level for the last century. Even though their local currency, GDP, has grown year by year, and yet per capita income in dollar terms kept on declining. And the reason is definitely financial mismanagement. But the consequence is that there has been continuous devaluation of the currencies, and that led to the problem that we see, meaning they are being trapped. They cannot grow out of being a middle-income country. They cannot graduate. So this is a very good lesson to learn that, in fact, pursuing a weak currency may not be good. In fact, pursuing a strong currency would be the answer, because it provides the pressure for the business to try to innovate, to try to be more competitive. Of course, it has to be gradual, it has to be manageable. But pursuing a weak currency would definitely not be pushing the country in that direction. Another concern that I have is the risk. We have been putting a lot of effort in trying to control risk in the financial system, particularly among the bankers, among the banking institutions. You name it, lots of criteria are being put into bank operations, such as Basel I, Basel II, and now we are looking at Basel III. My fear is that we try to look at one corner, and yet the system has moved on because of technology, because of fintech. You see a lot of near-banking businesses popping up. Nowadays you can do banking business with the convenience store around the corner of the street. Banks are being compressed. So my fear is, if we kept putting strict control on the formal banking institution and lose sight on the other, one day we may realize that we are too late. In fact, the crisis in the last 2 decades, in Thailand in 1987 or in the US in 2008, they came partly because of the financial innovation. In Thailand, there were emergence of hedge funds that the Thai authorities were not very well aware of their power. In the US, you have this securitization of the housing assets that the authorities also have lost their sight. At the moment, we see a lot of innovation going on, and yet we are not up to date about this so-called supervision on the non-bank system. Another matter that I'd like to raise is consumption. In fact, in the US at the moment, the only engine that is still functioning is consumption. If you look at the fiscal sector, the US government is incurring nearly $1 trillion deficit, and that is growing fast to above the amount of GDP of over 21 trillion. From time to time, you'll be fearing the shutdown of the government because they are reaching the debt limit. Private sector are not investing. In fact, they are making profits because they got tax cut, they got new technology, and yet they do not plow back their profits into new investment. They prefer to buy back shares, they prefer to pay dividends, prefer to take over other businesses. So the US is moving with only one engine, namely consumption. And the Thai authorities is also, in fact, trying to prop up consumption, trying to use the so-called helicopter money. You name it, chim chop chai, or Bia Konjon, or Pacharat, and so on and so forth. They seem to fix the idea that with consumption, you can create a sustainable economy to stimulate growth. The outcome in the last 5 years, we see Thailand being a sick person in ASEAN. Other ASEAN countries show a growth rate of 5 to 6%. India or China also show a growth rate of 6 or even more. And yet, the Thai is satisfied with only 2.5%, only one half of our neighbors. And yet, they continue to use this concept of consumption-driven policy. It is contrary to the fact of life that we are facing, because we need savings for the future, for our old age, for our children's education, and so on and so forth. I would rather see the government paying more attention to savings and make sure that this money being put into the right investment so as to stimulate growth, so as to make sure that the economy is competitive, rather than to spoil the people to travel and spend the money. Another fear that I have is that many officials are thinking that growth and distribution could be separated. So let's look at growth first, and the system will take care of distribution later. We have seen some research showing that countries like Holland, like Scandinavia, that have paid attention to distribution had shown a better economy than countries like the Anglo-Saxon, where distribution was ignored. So this is another fear that I have. Particularly, what we need to do is to make sure that growth is being inclusive. And I'm very, very pleased to see that nowadays inclusive growth becomes a common slogan among the international financial organizations like the IMF, the ADB, or even the OECD. Poverty alleviation. As you have known, the government has been trying to distribute the so-called food coupons. The Thai is called Pacharat, to all the villages, and hoping that this will help alleviate poverty and alleviate disparity of income. My fear is that this policy is destroying the multiplier effects of the local economies, because the money being given must spend at the shops that are controlled by the big stores in Bangkok. So there is no multiplier effect in the community. The money that is being spent would be directly pulled back into the center. And what about the small shops who cannot sell their products because they cannot compete, because they did not join this so-called Pracharat system? So, to me, to fight poverty or to alleviate poverty, we need to create the power to earn income, to create jobs, rather than to create consumption. Particularly, we need to spend money to upgrade their skills rather than to feed into their mouth. In fact, in Thai words, we have a very good proverb saying that we should teach the fisherman how to teach rather than give him the fish. That's the sustainable way of improving their livelihood. Another misconception that I have pointed out in the Parliament, particularly mentioned by the Prime Minister in October when he presented the budget. He was showing that government is now very strong because there's a lot of cash sitting in the treasury. To me, it is not a symbol of being wealthy. In fact, it's the contrary. It shows the inefficiency of the government system to spend the money, on the one hand, and all the money that you sit in the book of the treasury, you have the other contrary, namely the debt. There are 10 times short-term and long-term debt sitting in the treasury as well. To me, the best way is to try to minimize the holding of cash rather than to show off that you have a lot of cash in your pocket. So this is another shame idea that I would like to point out, that we need to clear up that showing high amount of treasury is not a wise thing to do. Another sentence that you may hear a lot by politicians is that don't worry about losses of the state enterprises, because public losses are people gains. So no need to improve the financial operations of the state enterprises. No need to make sure that they are healthy. Just let them continue suffering. I think every sensible people would imagine that this is not correct. And yet our politicians, or even NGOs, are trying to push this idea so as to protect many of these ill-functioning state enterprises, so as to prevent privatization and nationalization of the state enterprises. Another matter that bothers me a lot is big projects. We hear a lot of government officials trying to show off that they are going to boost economies by bringing up big projects. You name it, high-speed train, linking big airports, and so on and so forth. I wonder, what's the impact to the local economy if we started to put a lot of money into all these big projects? We don't have the technology. Of course, we have to buy it. And mostly it's turnkey. Mostly we would buy from China or Japan. We don't have the standard. They will set the standard. We don't have the money. They will lend us the money. And we pay back for the next 50 or 100 years. We don't have manpower. And they'll bring in manpower to do all the work. So suddenly, after the project is complete, what we have is just debt and all these operations. Question is whether it's worth and whether the economy would benefit from such operations. Last but not least is migrant labor. Because of demographic changes at the moment, we see a lot more older people and fewer younger people, because Thailand is one of the very successful countries that have pursuing the birth control policy. So nowadays, we are facing problem of labor shortage. In the past, there used to be about 1.2 million newborn for every year group or cohort. Now it's only half, only about 600,000. So you can imagine, Thailand is entering into a situation like in Japan or in Germany. In fact, we have been entertaining a lot of foreign laborers in the country already. And we have to prepare that there would be resentment by the local, like what happened in Europe. We have to make sure that we can manage this, because the economies or the business, they do need labor. Of course, we will have to encourage them to automize or to use robotics, but that would take time. So it's an issue that we need to put up the right policies. What happened at the moment at the Ministry of Labor is that it's very costly to bring in formally foreign labor. And therefore, there are a lot of illegal ones in the country. And when they want to come down, it creates a lot of uproars among the businesses. So all these are the 10 I would say, conceptions or the controversial issues that I'd like to exchange the idea with you, because on my side, I'm faced with decisions that we had to make. I had to raise my hand in the parliament whether I would approve or disapprove certain policies. But I need your support. As economists, you could make use of your tools, your analysis to guide us so that we can make proper policies. And with that, may I thank you again for your attention. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Dr. Pisit. It's great to hear that in the parliament now there is economists represented, because I know it's the same problem in most other countries, including the US, where people in the parliament, they kind of have good intentions, but unfortunately they're not professional economists, and they make misconceptions and checks. Okay, so now we have time for a few short questions. There are microphones here on the two sides. If anybody has a question, please come. Okay. Okay. You have a question? Where are the microphones? The microphones are on the two sides. In the rows. Okay.
Okay, I can jump.
Yes.
Okay, so one sec. They will give you the microphone.
The actual strong currency of Thailand should be continue or get it down?
Can you please repeat your question?
According to your view, strong currency is good. So what happened right now in Thailand, the Thai baht is very strong. That should be continue or put it down?
I hope I can give you a good answer. It's not an easy answer because the Thai baht had sunk to 55 baht per dollar in January 1998. And ever since that time, it had appreciated bit by bit. In the last 23 years, in fact, it has moved continuously until now about 30 baht. Before the crisis in 1997, it was at about 28 baht something. So we are touching the pre-crisis level. And to me, it is already bottom. If the baht appreciates even further, it will definitely hurt a lot of industry. And it will not be sustainable for the economy because you will see many layoffs, many enterprises that could not continue. So it's not because the central bank would have to intervene. I do not believe that central banks nowadays can support the currencies as they used to do in the past, because the Bretton Woods system has already broken down, and therefore we have to educate and make sure that people are well aware of hedging and exchange rate management. So for the baht, I think it's a natural level at the moment that it will continue, because we have to keep in mind that Thailand is among the ASEAN countries, and other currencies have not appreciated like the baht. In fact, the baht has been pushed up, not because of the fundamental as such, but because of capital flows, because people had a belief that the baht is a safe haven. They just look at the reserve of over 250 billion US dollar. I would say that 1/2 of these reserves came because of the low price of oil in the last 5 years. In fact, I had been pointing out to people that the military government in the last 5 years that they were in the power, in the government, they were really lucky because they committed the coup d'etat in the year when the oil price started to tumble from $120 to $60 nowadays. And in the last 5 years, the country current account has shown huge surplus because of the oil price decline. Apart from that, because of the low investment, therefore we imported less capital goods than what we should do, and that's why the GDP of the country has not grown much, and yet we have enjoyed the big surplus. I don't expect this surplus to continue, because eventually it will go back to normal, and therefore there won't be any forced to induce capital flows like in the last 5 years.
Thank you very much. Let's thank again the speaker.
Thank you.
All right. At this moment, we would like to ask Dr. Pisit to remain on the stage. And we would like to invite Professor Vladik to give Dr. Pisit our token of appreciation for coming to be with us today, even though he has to leave right away for the parliament. Please give a round of big applause for our keynote speaker, Dr. Pisit Liatham.
Thank you very much. So our plenary session continues, and we will have 3 invited talks. So the first invited talk will be given by Professor Mark Schaeffer from United Kingdom, using machine learning methods to support causal inference in econometrics. So let's welcome Professor Schaeffer.
Fingers. It's which one? Right. Okay. Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure, honor to be here. This is joint work with Achim Arends and Christopher Aitken. It's sometimes said that the best way to learn something is to teach it. Maybe the second best way to learn it is to have really smart students who can learn it with you and teach it to you. Achim and Chris are a current and former PhD student of mine, and I've learned hugely from them, and I'm very grateful. This was a challenging talk for me to put together because, on the one hand, this is an audience of an econometric society meeting and a very sophisticated audience. On the other hand, these are techniques which are, for many economists, and I describe myself as an economist rather than an econometrician, these are very new. And so it was a challenge for me to decide where to start. So, but this is a plenary session. Everybody's here, including many students, I think. So I thought I would start with some basics. Some of what I have to say at the very beginning will be very, very familiar to some of you, but hopefully it's useful to many. The background is, as I was saying, these are these machine learning techniques, which started with computer science, have moved into statistics departments, and now is getting the attention of economists. The question is, the central question for us as economists is, how can we make use of these methods? Now, I teach econometrics to undergraduates and to graduate students, and our workhorse model is ordinary least squares regression. We teach this all the time. Nevertheless, it's very challenging to get students to understand the nuances and to be careful with what they're doing. Now, one of the motivations for what I'll be talking about is we oversimplify often. We often don't know the true model. What is the true model? What does it mean to be the true model? So that's a motivation of model selection. It becomes even more challenging when the potential size of the true model is very, very large, and I'll be using P as is common to index the number of potential predictors. If it's close to or larger than n, we say that the data is are high dimensional, and if we use ordinary least squares, we're doomed. Basically, it will perform terribly. This issue is often not acknowledged in applied work. People just ignore it very often. I mean, a typical example would be cross-country growth regressions, which 10 years or so ago or 20 years ago was a very common thing to see, where we have only a small number of countries, but thousands of potential macro variables. What do we do? And the standard problem, the standard approach, which is hypothesis testing in the frequentist world, this fails badly. A particular problem I want to mention, because it'll come up later, is this issue of researcher degrees of freedom or p-hacking. Some of you in the audience will be very familiar with this. I see a few smiles. It's sadly common for people doing empirical work in economics to just keep trying stuff. They try this combination, they try that combination, they try a few times, they try some others. Finally, they get the star, they get the p-value is 5% or less. They can put a star next to the coefficient. Great, it's ready to send to the publisher. It's ready to send to the journal. This is a disaster. This is an absolute disaster. And one of the motivations, one of the things that in the methods that I'll be talking about is basically it's automated. Okay, it takes the degree of freedom away from the researcher. I think this is really valuable. Okay, now why would we want to use a fitting procedure other than OLS? For many of you, this will be very familiar. The bias variance trade-off. We were talking about this at dinner last night, whereby the person who's, I guess, primarily responsible for me being here said, "Oh, if it's got bias, why? Bias isn't a good thing. Bias is a bad thing. Bias isn't a bad thing. It's a good thing." And we can see this if we just write the prediction error for a model. There's a bias variance trade-off. We would like to have low variance and low bias, but not necessarily zero bias. Here's a picture. Let's see. Does this pointer work? What button do I have to? Do I have to press it? Oh dear, this is where I failed. Okay. Well, you can see pretty. Which? Oh, this one? Oh, it works. Great. Ideally, we would like to be here. When we teach econometrics, we put a lot of emphasis on estimators with zero bias. We love our unbiased estimators. It's blue, it's wonderful. This could put us here. It's got zero bias, but it's got a huge variance. Do we really want to use this for prediction? Maybe we would rather use this one, where it's biased, but there's very low variance. Maybe we're better off doing that. We don't teach econometrics this way, but we should. There are cases where now machine learning is basically in a sentence is tools for prediction. Okay, and there are cases where economists can make use of these tools in an off-the-shelf way because it's prediction that we want to do. In the macro or time series forecasting world, we want to do forecasting. We can use these methods profitably in forecasting, and this is starting to take off. Some other examples are on the slide, but we can't use these methods so directly if we want to do causal inference. Now, when I say causal inference, I mean I do labor economics, among other things. The classic causal inference question is what's the return to education? And we don't simply want to be able to predict someone's wage later in life. We would like to be able to know how much does an additional year of education lead to an increase in their human capital and therefore their subsequent earnings. It's a policy tool. We want to ask what's the impact of a policy, moving a policy tool. An example I'll be using later in the talk is what's the impact of building an incinerator on house prices? Well, we don't simply want to know that the fact that an incinerator was built is going to predict that house prices are generally are lower. That may be true if we're trying to predict house prices. We would like to know characteristics of the neighborhood, okay? But that doesn't tell us what is the impact of building an incinerator on house prices, because typically if you're going to build an incinerator in an area where prices are already low, where it's cheap housing. If you have to build it anywhere, you're not going to build it in the middle of luxury condominiums. We want to know what is the causal impact. What is the loss in capitalized value of houses of building an incinerator? Now, when we work with non-experimental data, this is the omitted variables bias problem, and we teach our students you need to include control variables. And what I'll be talking about basically is how do you choose these control variables? Can we use machine learning techniques to address the omitted variables bias problem? And the answer is yes. And we can do it, moreover, in an automated way. So the outline for the rest of my talk is an introduction to the lasso. I would expect many people in the audience, most, are familiar with the lasso estimator. Maybe fewer are familiar with the plug-in penalization or penalty term that's used with the lasso. This was developed by Bologna, Chernozhukov, Hansen, and others to assist with causal inference, but it's actually I think of general interest. And I'll show how this can be used. This estimator can be used to assist with causal inference, the so-called post-double selection estimator. Okay, so here's our general model. It's just simple linear model, and we have potentially very large number of regressors. P can be very large. It can be even larger than the number of observations. Okay, if we try to this accommodates many realistic settings. Okay, typically, traditionally in econometrics, we just waved our hands and said, "Oh, we're not going to worry about that." But it is a real problem. And if we use OLS and we try to accommodate the high dimensional nature of the problem, it's disaster. Okay, it becomes manageable if we assume exact sparsity. Where only S regressors or S predictors belong in the model. So most of the true betas are 0, but we don't know which ones. And again, this is probably how we should be teaching econometrics to our undergraduates, but we don't. We can also use the notion of approximate sparsity, where some of the betas are small, and they're well approximated by 0. So the overall approximation error is tolerable. And I'll talk a little bit about this more below. And this brings us to the famous lasso estimator, least absolute shrinkage and selection operator, which uses the L1 norm, where we minimize the we minimize the R-square plus a term which penalizes the absolute value of the selected coefficients, and the lambda is the tuning parameter, which encompasses the price that we pay for including a regressor. It's in contrast to using the L0 norm, where basically we just count the number of predictors used. This is computationally feasible, and it can be implemented pretty fast. It leads to solutions where most of the betas get set to 0. Okay, and that's because the nature of the constraint area, the constraint region, which is this blue diamond here, it's got lines and corners. And so when you take the contour lines and you bring the contour line closer and closer to the constraint area, you'll always hit a corner. And in this corner here, for example, beta 2 is non-zero, beta 2 is positive, and beta 1 is 0. Okay, this is in contrast to the ridge estimator, which uses the L2 norm, where you've got the constraint area is nice and smooth with no corners, and so beta 1 here gets set to something very small, and beta 2 here is quite large. Okay, right. So the lasso estimator has this nice feature that it sets most of the betas to 0, and it can be used, therefore, not just as an estimator in its own right, but also as a model selection tool. Okay, if we estimate the lasso, some of the betas will turn out to be non-zero, and that's our chosen model. We don't have to use the lasso coefficients. We can use what's called the post-lasso, And this is an example which is introduced by Bologna and Chernozhukov. This is an example where their work on developing tools for using machine learning and causal inference has, I think, payoffs which are wider than that. I don't know how widely the post-lasso is used, but it doesn't seem to be very widely used. Yet it has some nice advantages compared to the lasso, in particular, because the L1 penalty introduces a shrinkage bias, so coefficients are shrunk towards zero, and this can be addressed by basically using the lasso selected variables and then just using OLS. Okay, it's very simple. The question is, where does the lambda come from? What penalty do we choose? There are, well, basically three options. The most common one used is one is basically data-driven, where we keep resampling the data. We do cross-validation. I would expect most people in the audience, but possibly not all, know what cross-validation is. Another option is to use information criteria, where we basically do a grid search using a range of lambdas that minimize different information criteria. I won't talk about that. The one that I will talk about is the so-called rigorous lasso, where we use a theory-driven penalty. This has another example. It was introduced by first developed by Bickel et al. For the special case where the error variance is known. They extended it to the case of unknown error variance, accommodating heteroscedastic errors, non-Gaussian errors. They introduced feasible algorithms. This was all in support of their methods for causal inference, but it actually has, I think, general interest. It's computationally very, very appealing because you just calculate it, you plug it in, and you're done. As opposed to cross-validation, which can take rather a long time. In the interest of time, I won't review how cross-validation works. The issue with cross-validation in this context is that it tends to over-select. It's very good for prediction in a way, but it's almost too good for prediction. It tends to include lots of false positives. Okay, variables which are irrelevant and contribute a little, not zero, but a little, to the predictive performance. The rigorous lasso or the plug-in lasso does not. Okay, how does this work? Well, it's got well, as I was saying, it's nice. It's got these nice asymptotic properties. It's computationally very attractive, and we'll see it can be used to support causal inference. The ingredients of the three ingredients, I'll focus on the third. The first is that we're working with an approximately sparse model, so we don't assume exact sparsity, but we have to put some kind of limit on the degree of on the non-sparsity. So we're going to assume is that the sparse model is a pretty good approximation for the true model. Okay, some of the betas, maybe lots of the betas, are non-zero, but they're small, and only a small number, the S coefficients, are the important ones. We also need an assumption about the Gram matrix. You can think of this as the lasso equivalent or the lasso parallel to the rank condition. I won't talk about this. What I'll talk about mostly is the regularization event, because this is where the intuition for the rigorous lasso comes in. It's a little bit of notation. The S is the score vector, and Sj is the jth element of the score vector, and lambda, this capital lambda, is the maximal element of the score vector scaled by a predictor-specific penalty loading psi j. Okay, and QL is the quantile function for lambda. And so what we want to do is we're going to select the lasso penalty level to control the estimation noise. Okay? And in particular, what we want to do is we're going to pick the lambda so that it's big enough to dominate the estimation noise, in the sense that this regularization event, which is that the estimation noise is less than lambda over n, is likely in some sense. Okay? Now we don't know the quantile function for lambda. Okay? We don't know that yet. I'll return to that shortly. But here's the intuition behind it. Let's say the true model has no predictors at all. okay? For the lasso to select no predictors, the penalty parameters, lambda and psi, need to satisfy this inequality. So lambda needs to be at least this big, okay? Now, it turns out that for the lasso to select no regressors, okay, lambda needs to satisfy this inequality. Because we can say this here, because if there are no regressors, the dependent variable is just equal to epsilon I, just equal to the disturbance term. Okay, so after we do a little bit of reorganization, we end up with this here, and we end up with a regularization event. So what we've just shown here is that our regularization event. Really? Oh, I just noticed the number. That's a big 2. So in fact, I had only 20 minutes. Okay, so I'll finish up by saying this section, and then I'll do an example. Okay, the rigorous lasso has these asymptotic bounds, which are nice. But the nice thing about it, besides it being feasible to implement, there's this plug-in lambda here, this value here, which is easy to calculate, is that we can use it to choose control variables. Okay, so this is how the post-double selection works. Here's our simple OLS model. We think we need control variables because we're worried about omitted variable bias. The problem is that the control variables, we don't know the functional form. We have a lot to choose from. It's a high-dimensional problem. What do we do? If we use too many, we run into a version of the overfitting problem, and if we use too few, we end up with omitted variable bias. Okay? And if we allow the researcher to hunt around and p-hack, we end up with nonsense. So what do? We use the post-double selection method, where we estimate the lasso using the dependent variable, okay, without the causal variable d. Okay, so we just estimate this, and we identify the lasso selected controls A. That's the set of variables A. And then we do the same thing for the causal variable D. And that gives us a set of variables B. And now we estimate using OLS with these controls. And that's it. It's very, very simple to do. It's automated, so we've more or less eliminated the potential for p-hacking. We should be doing it this way. Okay? And here, this was my example of house prices. I'll finish up now. What's the impact of an incinerator on house prices? This is literally a textbook example. It comes from Wooldridge's textbook, his undergraduate textbook, and his graduate textbook. What's the impact on the price in a differences of differences estimation? And so it's natural to include a set of causal variables. Control variables. We have the characteristics of the house, how old it is, number of rooms, number of bathrooms, location characteristics, and so forth. Lots of potential control variables, but no good guidance as to which ones we should use. And so in the textbook, basically, it's just a kind of hand waving. Let's use some of them. Let's not use some others. Okay? What we can do instead is, let's say that these control variables encapsulate the main characteristics of the house, but we don't know the functional form, so let's just take a general second-order Taylor approximation. I just take the levels, squares, and cross products of all of them, and use these as the control variables. Lots of control variables, but the lasso will reduce the dimensionality, and that's what it does. Okay. The ones that show up are these here, a small number. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 out of the 34, and it's automated. There's no scope for the researcher to hack around, and these are the results, and there's no need for me to walk through. You can see what the methodology is. I've got more slides, but I think I've run out of time. I hope that wasn't too fast, but if there are questions, I can hopefully address them now. Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks a lot. Thank you very much. So we have time for a few questions. Okay, again, there's microphones here. In general, so for the first speaker, it was difficult because he was leaving for Bangkok, but Professor Scheffer stays with us. So if you have more questions, you can ask him during the breaks or after this talk. Okay? Any questions? Okay, Professor Hung Nguyen has a question, okay?
Oh, the hardest question.
Mark, could you elaborate a little bit for the benefit of students about what you mean by causal inference? Because in general, they learn that regression is not causation. So
yes.
Is that causal effect inference or causal inference?
Yes, that's a really good point. And this is a terrible problem with many econometrics textbooks and the way we teach econometrics. We gloss over whether we should interpret a regression coefficient as something which is useful for predicting an outcome, or whether we should interpret it as causing an outcome. Okay. When I talk about causing an outcome, I guess what we should have in mind is a policy lever, okay? A tool where in principle a policymaker or a decision maker has the option to pull the lever or not, okay? So we have the option of what happens. I'm a policymaker. I'm going to sign off on whether or not I'm going to allow an incinerator to be built in this neighborhood. If I say yes, what happens to house prices? If I say no, well, the house prices will presumably stay the same, okay? That's different, very different, from using the decision of the policymaker to predict what's going to happen to house prices. An example would, I'll give you a silly example. I could predict, or let's say let's say I'm a big internet company and I see what search terms are, and I see that if somebody searches for the word pizza, it's a good predictor for whether they're going to watch the football match in half an hour. Okay, that's a good predictor. Okay, if I'm using regression, I could even maybe get an estimate of the beta. Okay? But that doesn't mean that if I force someone to order a pizza, it's going to make them want to watch football in half an hour. Okay? That's a causal effect. It's very different. So what I was talking about here was using machine learning as a prediction tool to address the omitted variables bias problem. These control variables do not get a causal interpretation. Their only role is to eliminate the omitted variable bias and to enable me to interpret the causal coefficient as causal. Is that good? Good. Excellent. I hope that's the hardest question.
Okay. Well, thank you very much once again. So the next keynote talk is given by Professor William Briggs. Don't test, decide. So.
That's me.
Okay.
Do I just... Can I hold this? Echo, okay. So I'm very much interested in philosophy. I'm interested in the philosophy of modeling. So what I'm going to show you are some cartoon equations. There's not a lot of math in this talk or anything like this, but there are some very important and difficult ideas. Now, I want to talk to people who have studied traditional statistical and econometric models. And there are sort of two things here. We have people who come to us and they say, If I pull this lever, this policy lever, what's the probability that something will happen? If I take this pill, what's the probability I'm going to get cured? If I do something, which I'm going to call X, what's the probability that Y, that something will happen? That's what everybody comes to us wanting to know, everybody. But we don't give them that. We give them estimates of parameters that they know nothing about. Or we give them things like this. This is this complicated thing where we say, well, if I have a particular model, it's an ad hoc model, many people use it, and if I set one of those parameters equal to 0, and I make up this test statistic, and if I imagine I could repeat this trial that I've done here an infinite number of times, the probability of getting a test statistic larger than the one that I actually got, assuming that this parameter equals 0, is this number right here, this p-value, why then that p-value is small. And therefore what? Does that mean I have the probability of y given this thing x? If I say, if I pull, I didn't ask that, I want to know, if I pull this lever x, what's the probability of y? I have not answered that question. I have not given the person what they wanted to know. I've given them something that's mathematically pleasing to me, perhaps, but it doesn't say anything. So what I really want to do is, what I like about machine learning in particular, is it moves things towards a predictive mentality. Now, the reason we have this replicability crisis in econometrics and statistics and sociology and elsewhere is that people can create models. It's very easy to create models, come up with all these mathematical estimates and so forth, publish them, and then people forget and they move on. Instead, if you were to publish a model in a predictive form, if I put a model out there saying, if you take this new drug, here's the probability that you're going to live longer or live a certain number of years. Now I've put something out there that people can test. Anybody can check. If you're a physicist saying, or an engineer is saying, I have a theory about how a new bridge will work. Well, you could build that new bridge, and does it work? This is what we demand of engineers, this is what we demand of medical professionals, of physicists and so forth. But when we come to these statistical type models, we don't demand these things. Most of the time we do these tests that end up with p-values or confidence intervals or something like this, and we imagine what we have discovered the cause. Cause in any of these things, right, any sort of outcome, why that is involving people is very complex. Cause is almost impossible to find. And in fact, because cause can be so multidimensional, cause can be very, very highly dimensional, and in some situations, impossible to know. Now, I started out as a physicist before I got interested in philosophy, and in physics and quantum mechanics, which is why I like this new move towards quantum probability. We cannot know the cause. We can prove we cannot know the cause of certain events, namely these quantum mechanical events. And we cannot know the cause of a person making up their mind to make some economic decision. We don't know these causes. So the best we could do are these sort of correlational models that could make excellent predictions, maybe make great explanations of what has happened, but are forever ignorant, if you like, of the actual causes of things. All right, so that's what I want to talk about. So I have a cartoon equation here. It's just a cartoon. None of these equations I have are very deep or in-depth or anything like this. I have a proposition of interest, a y variable, and I have probative information, or information I think that if I know about this x, it tells me something about the y. D is just the old data that I might happen to have on hand for the y and x. And I have a model. I have some model of this. And together, all of this gives me a probability of y happening. So it's just as a cartoon equation, like I say, but this is if you're a Bayesian, you might call this the posterior predictive form. If you're a computer science and doing machine learning, why, this is just the output. This is the prediction that you're going to make. In no way is this an estimate of parameters or a test of any kind. Again, these are just cartoon equations. The idea is I have the probability of the outcome of interest, the y, that's conditional on some probative information, maybe some past data, and this thing I call B, which is the background information. All of that implies some model F. Now this F may be a completely probabilistic model. It may be a normal distribution for the simplest case. Or it may be a mix of deterministic and probabilistic information, as it is in some econometric models, or it may be entirely a causal model, as it is in some physics models. This is not meant to be anything other than just a representation of what models look like. Because the only point I want to make with this is that we may have several models in mind and we're not sure which one to use. Okay? And it's not that important. What I want us to get away from is thinking it is important to pick which model that we should use. The only point I wish to make about this slide is that any change we make to the right-hand side is a different model. If we add in new data, it's a different model. If we change the X, it's a different model. If we change the prior, these QRST, it's a different model. And we have all of these things that are under contention. Which model do we use? Should we make a decision which model that we should use? That's the real question. And really, there's only two scenarios. In all of modeling, there's only two scenarios. Either we have to pick a single model or a subset of these models because we can only measure or implement one of these models. For instance, it may be very costly to measure some of these X, and we can only do that, we can only measure one X and not several, so we can only pick one model. Or it may be a time constraint where to calculate these models, it's too expensive to calculate more than one, and so on. Or we don't care about the models at all. We don't care about that part of the modeling, the details of the model itself, and this is what computer science do with machine learning. We only want to make good predictions. We want to make very good predictions. And so the model disappears and we're only left with the background information that we assume is interesting. Well, it's very simple to do multiple models. You just look at the posterior distribution of the models of interest, and you could, in that case, pick the model that gives you the highest posterior probability, but that's not right. That's a test. Because it could be that a model that gives you a very high posterior probability of being a good model is not a useful model for you. It could be useful to somebody else, but not for you. So you don't want to pick just based on probability. You must decide, because model goodness, model accuracy, model evaluation depends on the uses to which the model are put. I'll give you a very good example. Bernie Madoff was a well-known investor in the United States. He had some models that he was using that were very beneficial personally for him. They were lousy models in accord with reality, as it turned out. But it depended on your perspective. It's a fanciful example, but it proves to you that to pick a good model depends on what you're going to do with it. And it's very often the case, especially when you're testing, you're saying with any kind of statistical test, here is the final answer. This is it. This model works for everybody under all circumstances, and that's just not true. Okay, so we'll go through an example of that. And the other is, the one that I favor for most uses, is no model whatsoever. In the sense that we have integrated out all of the uncertainty we have in all of the models that we have under consideration. And in the end, all we're left with is predictions. We're saying, here are the probative information X, here are the past data, here are the predictions I'm making. And if the predictions are good and useful to me, I'll know that, because I'll use this model in real life. And that's what we have to do. This is why I favor publishing models in predictive output, so that anybody can test your model. You say you have a good model? Very well, let's see. anybody should be able to test the model under any circumstance. Okay, I'm not going to go into this, I don't have time, but we were discussing this at dinner last night too. There is a philosophical sidetrack for all this. There is a basis for all this. Reality at its most fundamental level is discrete and finite. And you could define what makes a good model, what it means to be a good model, and what distinguishes between models in a way that we don't have time to discuss, so I'll just skip right on past this. Okay, so how do you know if a model is any good? Well, it depends on you, or it depends on your client. It depends on the situation. We can, because often the case, we have data that we have in hand, and we want to create some kind of a model, but we don't know how it's going to work in the future because the future has not yet arrived. We can use the data we have on hand to make a guess by using some score of the actual probability predictions that we have and the past data. People sometimes do cross-validation, that's okay. But it reuses the actual data that you have on hand too. Sometimes people take a data, they break it up into a training set and a validation set. That's okay too, except that everybody cheats and they reuse the validation set over and over and over again. So that's not a true test either. But that's fine, because that's the situation that we have. There is no other way except to estimate how good the model is going to really do when we release it into the wild. So this is a second layer of modeling, if you like. This is an estimate of how well your model is going to do in the future. And really, that's all you have. So here is a very simple example. Appendicitis. So patients come to an emergency room, they complain of right lower quadrant pain. And do they have appendicitis? This is one of the things the doctors immediately think of. We can measure very quickly their age, their white blood count, their sex. But suppose I only have time to measure one of these other 8 attributes. Suppose it costs me time and money that I can't afford. I can measure one, but I can't measure them all. And I need to pick which of these is the best one to do. So this is the first scenario in which I want to have a predictive model, but I'm in a constrained circumstance. So I have starting right lower quadrant pain, moving pain to the lower left quadrant, and all these other things. They're just medical measures. There's 8 different medical measures. That's not really that important. Now, here's where it comes in. So what do? I have this model. It's a predictive model. Now it depends on the situation. This is where the statistician is not being helpful by giving a test, a p-value, or anything like this, because he is saying that this model then fits for everybody in all situations. No. This is where you have to work with the person and say, what's the decision you're going to make with this model? Maybe it's a good model for you, maybe it's not. So I'm going to pick a model such that I have a prediction of appendicitis. If that probability is greater than 1/3, I am going to act as if the person has appendicitis, meaning I'm going to cut them open and do an exploratory laparotomy or do something else. Okay, so there's a decision I'm going to make. And accurate predictions incur no costs. This is a very, no sort of utility costs. And false positives receive a penalty of 1, false negatives a penalty of 2. These are arbitrary, but you must pick these things based on the situation at hand. Every model has a use. Otherwise, you wouldn't be doing it. And you have to find out what that use is and what the meaning of that thing is. So this is very simple. So we have here the probability, the posterior probability of each of those models. I had 8 of those things that I could measure. And this is the model score, where higher is worse, lower is better, because it's just a measure of distance score. So model number 2 had the lowest score, but didn't have the highest posterior probability. So which model do you pick? You have to pick one of the 8. Well, it's a decision problem. It becomes a decision problem. There's no test here. It's not a test that we can do in any standard statistical way. You have to decide based on the decision, and it's not the statistician's or the econometrician's job to pick what that method would be. I don't know what the answer is. It would depend on the emergency room physician. So this is just a cartoon example to show you that. The other thing is, the other scenario was I don't care about the individual model. I don't care about model selection. I don't care how many different regressions you tried. I don't care how many different parameters you estimated. I just want a probability that I could use as a prediction. So I'm going to do prostate cancer. A PSA, a prostate-specific antigen greater than 10, is typically taken as indicative of something going on with the prostate, that action has to be taken. So I'll do this particular model here of a probability of having a PSA greater than 10 based on one of these medical measures. Now, this is just a cartoon example, as I say, but I could have a linear model. I could have all kinds of different models I could consider. For instance, I could consider just the model with none of these things in it, just an intercept model, or the model with just the log cancer volume, or the age, or the sex, or whatever. I could have models in combination, and on and on. It becomes this sort of model selection problem. But I don't care. I'm not interested in the model selection itself. It's not interesting to me. This doesn't have to be logistic regression. It could be these lasso regressions, where you have different methods of choosing the lambda parameter. It doesn't matter. So however many models that you have in contention, in the end, what I want to produce is a prediction, And I'm interested to see in these causal aspects as well. So for instance, if I were to consider, and this is, I know of no reason why anybody would consider, but if I wanted to consider each of the 2 to the 7th, 128 different linear models that I could have, I could look at the individual predictions of them. I could look at the individual probabilities that they make, that's the y-axis, and plot it by these different probative values that I have. And then I could look at the red dots I don't care about the individual models. I am going to integrate out all the uncertainty I have in all these models, and that becomes my prediction. So now, you have to tell me whether or not age, I could look at this and I could say, I put age into all these models. Is age helping me out? Should I be measuring age? It becomes a decision problem, not a test. There are slight changes in the probability given a person's age and prostate, but is it enough to make a difference? It depends on the situation. If you're a health commissioner and you're looking at a population of millions, maybe a probability change of 1 is important. If you're a doctor in an emergency room, probably not. If you're an individual, it probably means nothing. So again, the model that you would fit and estimate and do all that kind of stuff is different than the one you would do depending on the decision that you would make. And you could look at other things like Gleason's score. I won't do that. So this is just to show you, for all of those 128 models, I could calculate Breyer's score. In other words, I could look at the probability of a person having cancer and whether or not they did have cancer, and I could calculate a score. And the Breyer score is just that probability minus the indicator of cancer squared. And I could look at, for every one of those models, where the model number doesn't mean anything, I've just sorted them by the maximum Breyer score. I could look at the distribution of the scores. So which of these models should I pick? Well, I shouldn't pick any of them if I'm not interested in the model. If I just want to integrate out all the uncertainty I have in all of these things, I would come up to this red line. It doesn't have the absolute lowest mean Breyer score, but neither does it have a lot of variability. It all depends on the situation. So, like I say, these are cartoon examples. The point is I want to make are 3. If we're talking about true models and all this sort of thing, a true model would be where we know the cause. If we knew the cause, we could write the cause down, and it would be a deterministic thing, and there would be no need for probability. In some cases, we could not do the cause. In quantum mechanics, for instance, we don't know what the cause is. And human will and the human intellect, we don't know what the causes are. And so we have to use probability. And we could use probability, but it's not, we have to use probability to make predictions. And it's only in making predictions that we know we have a good model or we don't. If we're going to use testing, testing talks about stuff that's internal to a model. That's internal to the model itself that doesn't mean anything necessarily to reality. Tests could pass very nicely, but the model could fail dismally. Or tests may not pass at all, but the model may perform beautifully. We really only have two situations. We have the situation in which we have to do some kind of a model and we have to make a choice among different models because we can only afford one kind of a model for one reason or another, or one subset of model. That's a decision, that's not a test. And the second is where we don't really care about all the different types of models that we're using, but we do care about making very good predictions for us in a situation that is important for us, that may not be important for somebody else. Now, like I say, these are cartoon equations, cartoon examples to try to make them very general. There's lots of scope for work on these kinds of problems if students are interested, particularly in this idea of marrying machine learning with model selection, if you like. And that's all I have to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Questions? Professor Huang? Hung, you have a question?
Nobody, then I say something.
I hope it.
Oh, it looked to me it's like probabilistic inference. So basically, you make decision on probability. Where you get this probability to make decisions?
Well, the probabilities depend on the models that you're going to pick. And the models that you pick depend on the background information that you're assuming. The background information that you assume deduces which models that you would use. Most of the time, many people just say, well, I'm going to use this set of models because this is what people use. That's your background information, just using ad hoc models that everybody else uses. But of course, there are many situations where we can deduce the form of the model. And these situations are more physical, where we have notions of actual causes or of physical processes that we understand in greater detail. So that, in those cases, the probabilities come directly from theory. So it all depends. There's no one answer where the probabilities come from. Most of the time, for econometric models, they're just ad hoc, I think.
Other questions? Okay. If there are no questions, thanks a lot. And the last invited address, the last plenary talk on this session, will be given by Professor Hung Nguyen himself. There's no need to introduce him. He already was introduced many times. So he will give a talk titled On Modeling of Uncertainty in Behavioral Economics.
At the beginning. Where do you oh, just take it out from here. Okay, let me just take it out. Yeah, I'm going to just read what I put on the board. Okay, I was talking about calculus of uncertainty. As you will see in a minute, this is the cornerstone of all statistic analysis for economics. So the aim of this one is really to emphasize, everybody know that we use statistics in economics because of uncertainty. Okay? But the question is, what is certainty and what is the calculus of certainty that I will mention? Okay. First of all, normally we have uncertainty and we model uncertainty by probabilities. But remember this. Probability is the most important concept in model science, especially as nobody had a solid notion what it means. Don't forget that. Okay? But if you want to know a little bit about that, you can read the recent text by Percy Diagonis and Skerb, 10 Great Ideas, published by the Princeton University Press. That where you can have other idea about uncertainty. Maybe it will complement what Bertrand Russell said years ago. Okay. Another quotation I want people to look at is uncertainty is a fundamental fact about the world, while probability is not. The error has been to equate uncertainty with probabilities. Now, at the fundamental research for economics, we are looking at the concept of uncertainty. Now, if you think about uncertainty, we should take a simplest example from physics. You know, with Newton mechanics, in fact, it's deterministic. There's nothing random about it. But why we have a stochastic system is because of the noise. Okay? And what is the calculus of that? The calculus of that is Kolmogorov. The reason is Kolmogorov because there are 10 different ways to model uncertainty. And we only pick Kolmogorov. Why? Because that's mathematics. Don't forget, statistics is made by mathematicians, not by statisticians. And they will not do anything else. It's not mathematics. That's why we pick Kolmogorov. And from that, what happened today? What is the finance mathematics, finance economics? It's a subset of the theory of stochastic process. Okay. Now, if you look at quantum mechanics, the quantum mechanics is intrinsically random. Okay? And now the uncertainty in quantum mechanics may be the same meaning as the uncertainty in other situations, but the calculus is different. That's what I want to mention. It's not because you model uncertainty by one set of axioms and it follows the calculus. The calculus for quantum probability is different. The point I want to point it out is that the calculus of certainty, it is not the concept of certainty, it's the calculus of certainty which dictate what we're doing. So what kind of other uncertainty? I don't have time to go into that, but I just tell you one kind of uncertainty which for sure you cannot model by probabilities. That is the fuzziness of Lotfi-Zadeh in 1965. Okay? So, however, if you look at two kinds of uncertainty that we run into economics, there are two kinds. One is ordinary uncertainty, the other one, what they call it, epistemic uncertainty. That's why you have two schools of thought, the frequentist and the Bayesian statistic. Now, the meaning are different. Clearly, the meaning of epistemic uncertainty and ordinary uncertainty is the same thing. But they think that these are the two sides of the same coin. What does that mean? They two different manifestations of the same coin, and therefore they had the same calculus. They use the same calculus for subjective probabilities. Now, so let me say something relevant to this analogy. This is again the problem of testing that everybody was mentioned this morning. First of all, when you want to do the test, The only way to do the test, to make decision is do a testing. That's what people teach decision theory for undergraduate students. What is the decision theory? You teach about testing, okay? Because there's no decision theory involved, there's no uncertainty involved. So, but Fisher decided to make testing by using one hypothesis and using the concept of p-value to carry it out. Just after that, Neyman and Pearson attacked Fisher and said, we provide a different, better framework for decision theory. Namely, we put two hypotheses and we consider different kind of error. But in fact, it is the same, they are two sides of the same coin. Because whatever the framework are different, the essential is how to carry out the test is the same. So it's precisely, there's nothing different. That's why nowadays they put under the same name, call it null hypothesis, significant testing. And all of them using one thing, because they consider Fisher and Neyman Pearson are two sides of the same coin. Okay, but certainly, what I want to mention to you today is the state of the art of what we are facing nowadays. There's a recent paper called Radical Reformulation of the Notion of Subjective Probabilities. Okay? That will shake the whole foundation of Bayesian statistics. And the subjective probability, this is a paper in the Journal of Behavioral Finance just a few years ago. The answer is this. No, subjective probabilities are not the two sides of the same coin. Specifically, they do not satisfy the same Kolmogorov axiom, so that their associated calculus are different. And this is similar to what I will mention at the end about quantum probabilities, that we're talking about quantum economics nowadays. So the calculus are completely different. And that, for the time being, whatever you are frequentist or Bayesian, the only difference is how you interpret the concept of chance. But the calculus in both sides are the same. That's why you can put prior together with the frequentist and to come up with posterior distribution. If two things are two different things, you cannot combine two different calculus to get to the same thing. So Ramsey have told us long time ago, subjective probability have to do with uncertainty that are not probabilistic. Again, I don't have time to go into what is the kind of uncertainty which is not probabilistic. Fuzziness. Okay, so let's see. I don't have time to go into the paper of this. I had a paper with me here. Anybody interested, I can give the paper. But I just summarize what this paper, and it will change everything that Bayesian are going to do in econometric. Uncertainty, subjective probability is an appraisal. Okay? When you try to buy a house, how you make an appraisal, that's what it is. Okay? Subjective probabilities are appraisals. Think about it. Go into Google. If you don't understand what it is, find out the example and the meaning by yourself. Subjective probability is the language for expressing uncertainty appraisal. I give you the definition anyway. That is redescription of facts in terms of non-probabilistic uncertainty, carrying out tautological implications for actions. So, but how you let's say quantify appraisal? You quantify appraisal by something like it's likely using natural language to do that. So what is the language for subjective probabilities? I will read what I put on about. You will be amazed that Lord Fizade was right on along since 1965. Very successful in AI and engineering computers area. It is about time to get into economics. Okay. So I have some example here. In other words, appraisal are expressed by natural language, like something is likely, something is very unlikely, something is possible of that form. In other words, it is about possibilities, not probabilities. Okay? So these are the things that Zade foresaw a long time ago. So the question is, everyone understand what is everyone understand what is uncertainty, but we don't know how to do it until we have a quantitative theory put down by Convo Group to do on calculation. Now we have economists suggested that subjective probability should be modeled at possibilities. Fine, but the question is, do you have a calculus of possibility to carry out the analysis? So the answer is yes, we can. We can provide a calculus of possibility theory to complete the work of this paper. Because, why we can? Because there is nothing new under the sun. So it's all began with the concept that familiar to everybody called random set. And if you want, you can read my book. The only book in the literature devoted to students to learn random set. So what happened is this. I try to explain to you how you come up with the calculus of possibilities. Just the same way that Convo Group put down a set of 3 axioms for the concept of probabilities. First of all, if you look at Shannon information theory based on entropy, you run into the following situation. On a probability space, if you take any function, non-negative function, what is bounded function, and you consider this probability sequence of probability measure on A is on the sigma field A, then you can show that this limit is equal to this, and this is a function of A is a maximative function. That means the function is idempotent, it's not additive. Another example, in the theory of log deviation conversion, the situation is the limit of probability measure at the end are maximative function. In other words, these are idempotent probabilities. Probability where you replace arithmetic plus and multiplication by maximum and minimum. So here is a precise situation. So you can feel what does that mean possibility? How you compute the possibility of something? If probabilities, you take the frequency, and it's one way to give a quantity notion. What does that mean? 70%. And now what does that mean? It is possible 70%. What does that mean? Okay. So if you can see, if you take any function from here to here, it will play the role of a possibility distribution, just like a probability density. Everything I do in here has been known since 1978 by Lord Fizade. Okay? And widely used. You go on Google and you click on possibility theory, you have thousands of paper and work with application, but only in AI, artificial intelligence, not go into statistics and econometric yet. So if you look at the positive distribution, it's a function with just like a density function. Then there exists a random set, such that what is it? Okay. If you have an event A, you want to know when the event, what is the chance for event A happen? Okay. So if you perform the experiment, if you want to say, let's say, if you roll a pair of dice, and you consider the event that the sum of the two die is equal to 7. Okay? So you run 2 die, you get 1 6, one of them, but the event is realized. So here is the situation where you don't have that. This is the event you want, but the random set with intersection with that is not empty. It's not empty, but it doesn't mean it covers it. So you don't know the probabilities. You only know the possibility, and that happens to be the soup. In other words, you can see the form of the calculus of possibility. It's not additive. It's the soup of something. And that can be shown easily. If you take alpha, if you have a function like that, you take the randomized the level set, you can get this one. And then that random set in statistics, we call that the cost data. When you observe something but it's not clear, you get a random set like a confidence interval rather than the point precise. And that represents the possibilities. It's possible that A occur. So the probabilities of this one is the possibility for the event A to occur. And this quantity is called the degree of possibilities, just like a probability, and the calculus is the maximum. So if you have a function defined on that set, and you take the sum of that, that is called the possibility measure. That's the same thing that we call a probability measure. This is precisely the axiom proposed by Lord Fizade in 1978 for a first time for the quantitative theory of possibility theory. And that is his paper. His paper is appear in the Journal of Fuzzy Set and System in #1 in 1978. It's called Fuzzy Set as a basis for a theory of possibility. Now, if we take a minute look at Bayesian, when you do Bayesian, if the parameter space is unbounded, what you do? You still put a uniform distribution on it, and you call it, it is not a possibility, it's not a uniform. So you call it improper uniform. You take equal to 1 all of them because the area underneath is not equal to 1. But if you look at that, it is precisely a possibility distribution. You don't need the area under the curve to be equal to 1. The value of that. So what they do in Bayesian is really a little bit of possibility theory already. So there are many other uncertainty, and I want to give the state of the art in a minute. They propose many different ways of modeling uncertainty. Now, in 1988, to sum up the state of the art, up to 1988, David Krebs wrote the following in his book. These data provide a continuing challenge to the theories, a challenge to develop and adapt the standard models, not in quantum mechanics, so that they are more descriptive of what we see. It will be interesting to see what will be in the course of choice theory in 10 or 20 years. Now, 30 years later, what do we see? We see quantum economics. What does that mean? What is the biggest cover on uncertainty we need that Krebs want to know 30 years later? And here it is. That's all I want to say, and I want to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. So, this time we don't have Professor Nguyen to ask a question, so I strongly encourage people in the audience to ask questions.
By the way, I don't take questions.
Okay. So.
Oh, please don't.
Devastating critique. So how do we change people teaching all this stuff? I mean, everywhere you go to a statistics 101 class, they immediately start teaching p-values, they immediately start teaching all this other stuff. I mean, how do we cut that off and do it right?
Number one, what I'm doing here is give the state of the art. Actually thing, it's not from me. I only see things and tell you. Number one. Number two, I don't destroy anything. Just like a quantum mechanic does not destroy Newton mechanics. It's really an extension. Because if you propose anything else, different than probabilities, people don't like it. Because they say, oh, it's completely different, and I don't see the rationale why I have to manipulate things like you. But quantum probabilities is a generalization, exactly like a quantum mechanic or Einstein relativity, extending Newton, not destroying. If you want to make the airplane, you're still using Newton mechanics. You don't use quantum mechanics to make the airplane, okay? But if you want to use your GPS, then you have to use Einstein. If you want to use your iPhone, then you have to use quantum mechanics, okay? We don't destroy anything, we just make things. Everything people propose nowadays, number one, subjective probabilities, same as Kolmogorov, because they use the same calculus. Additivity is the main thing. Other people like Ale, Ellsberg, and everybody else, they do especially behavior economics. They use new uncertainty that are mainly non-additive. Okay? They're non-additive. So right now, the question is, at the end, what is the one would cover everything? And the question right now that I really want to talk about is, we have a 3 Nobel Prize award for behavioral economics during the last 5 or 10 years. If you look at them, including the book I just mentioned, Quantum Economics, they are talking about human uncertainty, which is completely different than probability or physics uncertainty. But there's one thing missing. What is the calculus of this uncertainty? For example, right now, possibility replace Bayesian. Okay? The challenge problem is you cannot combine cow and horses. The calculus of probabilities is additive. And if you use Bayesian at your prior information, you cannot couple with the other one because they are two different animals. Okay? One is possibility, the other one is probability. You cannot put them together, so there's no way you can get something like a posterior distribution to carrying out a Bayesian analysis. What I propose is to uncover everything, including the situation of one of Robert Thaler, got being the last Nobel Prize in behavior economics, is that the uncertainty, if you want to reflect the real uncertainty of human, not of nature, it has to be non-commutative. And that theory is called quantum probabilities. Does that answer your question?
Okay. No other questions. Let's thank the speaker once again.
Okay.
So thank you very much, Professor Mark Schaffer, Professor William Briggs, and Professor Hang Yuyan and Professor Vladik Kranovich for such a stimulating session.
Yes, and with that, this is our conclusion for morning sessions. So let have lunch break, and then we come back at 1:30 p.m. So you can check the presentation schedules at your folders that we given, and also near the board, near registration areas, and also at the websites.
So please feel free to attend any sessions according to your interest. For invited speakers, don't forget to share your sessions, okay? That's why you're here, right?
Yes, that's right.
So the lunch will be, for invited speakers, the lunch will be served on the first floor of the new building. So this is the first building, so you guys have to walk over to the third building for your lunch, and our staff will guide you there.
And for others, please collect your lunchbox at registration desk, and there are space provided on the ground floor and of this building and the first floor on the first floor of the second buildings for participants to enjoy the lunch. And also, please do not forget to return the evaluation form because your feedback is very important to us.
Right, so this is the end of our first morning session. We are again thankful for our guests of honors, participants of the conference, and all the delegates. We wish you enjoy the rest of the event at Chiang Mai University and in Chiang Mai. Thank you.
Thank you very much.